Hello and welcome to Inside Politics. I'm Anastasiya Lavrina. Greenland, one of the most unexpected and underestimated flashpoints in today's transatlantic politics. In the last days, Washington's push for expanding strategic influence in the Arctic and Greenland in particular has triggered a sharp response across Europe. What began as a diplomatic dispute has now spilled into the fields of trade, tariffs and alliance politics, unsettling financial markets and prompting emergency consultations among EU leaders. For the United States, Greenland represents far more than a remote island. It's a military outpost, an Arctic asset and a geopolitical buffer at a time when the High North is becoming contested space. For Europe, the issue is equally sensitive, touching on sovereignty, NATO cohesion and the wider question of American unilateralism. And the tension, Greenland's own political leadership has asserted its voice, insisting that sovereignty, self-government and economic choices cannot be negotiated over third parties. So today we ask, what brought a semi-autonomous Arctic territory into the center of a United States-European Union confrontation? And what does this moment reveal about the future of the transatlantic alliance? Joining me now from the United States of America is Ivani Vasoler, Professor, State University, and also joining me is John Kawulik, Senior Editor, Issues Insight. Dear experts, welcome to Inside Politics. And Ms. Vasoler, if you don't mind, let me start with a basic question to you. Is a renewed United States interest in Greenland driven primarily by security concerns, competition with China and Russia, or broader questions of Arctic influence?
I think the interests of United States, as stated by President Donald Trump, are many, or at least several, I would say. He is insisting that it is a problem of protecting the national security of the United States. He is concerned with the presence of other powers, great powers, in the Arctic region. And he believes that the presence of other powers in the Arctic region obviously undermines or put in jeopardy the interests of United States. Certainly, he already mentioned about the resources existing or the resources available in Greenland as justification to take control of the Arctic island that belongs to Denmark. So there are several statements of the president. What is absolutely sure is that he is not decided to negotiate any other thing except to take control of Greenland.
Well, that's very interesting, Mr. Kawulik. Security and resources. So many explanations and the arguments President Donald Trump is using to describe his willingness to take control over Greenland. But do we also agree that this is the only possible way to move forward for the United States, threatening invasion even by force? How will it and can it affect the foreign image, the international image of the United States of America?
It's going to be profound, but I think it is important to note President Trump's interest in Greenland is not driven by minerals, not driven by Russia and China, not driven by security interests. It's driven by insecurity. And basically, this is what happens when the United States electorate elect a man who is focused on himself, focused on first, focused on best, focused on winning. And this is about his America First, which is really America's fist. It's about using power to get what he wants. It's about bullying. And it's about 40 years for him perceiving, and it began with his real estate business in New York City, that he was always looked down upon because he was brash, because everything was gold, and the traditionalists just didn't like him. He goes to Palm Beach, he buys Mar-a-Lago, the home of Marjorie Merriweather Post, turns it into a club. He becomes president, and now everyone is basically looking to kiss him and kiss his ring. So this is driven by a sense of ego, a sense of grievance, and it's basically, if he can bully, that's what he's going to do. It's basically bully first, negotiate second.
Mr. Kowolik, one more question. Has the United States' approach to Greenland's strategic value signaled a new pattern of unilateralism within the transatlantic alliance?
I think it's continued. What we've seen during the last 30 years of U.S. presidents is when countries will claim the U.S. is violating international law, or the U.S. will claim that a country is violating international law, more and more heads of state and heads of government, they will look at it and they will say, no, we're not, because we have lawyers that tell us that we are within the confines of international law. And it's important to remember, international law was written by lawyers, and it was written in such a way for their clients to get out of it, to massage it, to move around it, to manipulate it. And so that's what countries have done. And so with President Trump, he somewhat turbocharged this, but it shouldn't surprise anyone. And he's not the only one. Countries in Europe, countries in the Middle East, countries on the African continent, countries in Asia, they're all doing the same, basing what they're doing on their interpretation of international law. So for the U.S., is it damaging to our, global reputation? Perhaps. But the bigger question is, from President Trump's perspective, so what? What can you do about it? We have economic might in terms of GDP. We have military might in terms of defense spending, and we have population. And everyone wants to be a part of the U.S. market. But more importantly, they don't want to be punished by the United States president using tariffs, using sanctions, using visas. And so that's where we are in terms of the more powerful presidency. And President Trump is basically doing what he has seen other heads of state, other heads of government in, let's say, more less elastic democracies or authoritarian governments. He sees what they can do, and he wants to emulate it.
Well, we will definitely come back to the question about tariffs, but as for now, Ms. Vassoler, in continuation of this topic, could the dispute over Greenland reshape how NATO members view burden sharing and collective defense priorities?
Based on what we can see, the analysis coming from Europe and the United States, obviously that the dispute over Greenland, the dispute with Denmark, is involving now not only European Union countries, but other countries in Europe, has the potential to cause many disruptions. Disruptions, for example, with the NATO alliance, obviously considering that Denmark is a NATO country, and other countries in Europe that are also NATO members are quite unhappy, if I could use this expression, with the situation. They feel that actual threat is coming from the United States, and obviously there is this potential to disrupt the alliance, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. And also there is the potential, and I believe that is now happening, to disrupt stock markets. I cannot say much about the United States today, because today, 19th of January, is an official holiday in the United States when Americans celebrating the civil rights leader Martin Luther King. So stock markets are closed. Let's see how stock markets in US are going to behave tomorrow in the light of this Greenland issue that is obviously a developing issue. There is the expectation that President Donald Trump is going to be in Europe still this week to participate in the Forum for Economic Cooperation, Davos, in Switzerland. And so let's see what is going to come from his presence in that meeting. So the domestic disruptions as well in politics, considering that there are some Republicans, there are politicians from the same party of President Donald Trump, some senators, I believe that at this point they are 10, that are quite discontent and rejecting the notion, the idea, the plan, whatever it is, that United States should conquer Greenland.
Ms. Vassoler, another question to you. What role should Greenland's own political leadership play in steering its future, and whose interests are being prioritized here?
The role of Greenland, so based on what we know, the population of Greenland, considered now around 60,000 people, they don't agree with this occupation, takeover. Apparently, most of Greenlanders, based on the polls, don't want to be part of United States or join United States in some form. Obviously, Greenland is an autonomous territory. There is a government in place, but also there is the fact that Greenland belongs to Denmark for more than 300 years, and Denmark has also to say. Greenlanders and the government of Denmark would like to negotiate. In addition, it's well known that for all these years, before President Trump came to the presidency, Denmark has had an excellent relationship with the United States, including Greenland. Denmark always expressed the desire, the willingness to cooperate with the United States in relation to Greenland, including if the case of any security issue there in the island could arise, Denmark is willing to cooperate. So
well,
for both the government of Greenland and the government of Denmark, the best option is negotiation.
You indeed raised a very important moment here, and Mr. Kavulik, I would like to continue discussing the future possible outcomes for Denmark and for Greenland itself. Greenland belongs to another government, therefore. What will be the best scenario for the United States to find a solution of this situation? Let's say negotiations, diplomacy, or the force, as it was mentioned some times before by Donald Trump himself?
The result will be a combination of all of those. It's important to remember that President Trump has now altered what most people would believe to be a fact. That Denmark controls, owns, inhabits Greenland. He's already now put out there into the ether, where's the paperwork? Very real estate-like. Where's the deed? Where's the title? Where's the paperwork that shows ownership? So he's already drawn that into question now. And so from his perspective, Greenland is for sale. And it's not quite sure who owns it. Therefore, if the U.S. were to move in by force, that's fine because it's ungoverned. And at the same time, if he does look toward negotiation in some regard, whether it be with the EU, whether the 27 members of the EU, of which Denmark's a member, the 32 members of NATO, of which Denmark is a member. The result is going to have to be something where in his mind and publicly, he can say, I won, and most importantly, they lost. He will not be satisfied by I won and they won. We compromised. He wants something, and this is always his standard operating procedure, where he wins and the loser must acknowledge publicly that they have lost. He has beaten them, and they have submitted to his will. So I expect that we're going to see this carry on in terms of, for example, the World Economic Forum in Davos. You're going to have, I think, 6 of the 7 heads of state, heads of government in the G7 that will be there. Now, principally, originally, their goal was to talk about Ukraine, for the U.S. and Ukraine to sign this $800 billion, which is, mythology, but sign this investment deal. It was also to work out the final points on what would be presented to the Russian Federation. And now this has happened. So President Zelensky of Ukraine, his head is spinning around because once again, something has come in to interrupt what his goal was supposed to be. And if you're right now, if you're in Davos, the happiest head of state this week is going to be President Erdogan of Turkey, because in July, he hosts the NATO Leaders Summit in Ankara, Turkey. He has to be very, very happy today that he's not planning to be in Davos, because the other leaders, the NATO leaders, would now push saying, this is something that goes on the agenda in July. They will try to buy some time, place President Erdogan in a challenging position. So he's a very happy man today that he knows he's not going to be there on Wednesday when President Trump will be there.
Very interesting point. One more question, Mr. Kavulik, if I may. You touched the European Union, and we do hear what European Union leaders are saying in regards to the Greenland. They do support Denmark's position, and they oppose the arguments provided by US President Donald Trump. EU member states are considering retaliatory measures against the United States over Greenland, totaling 93 billion euro. According to British newspaper Financial Times, the EU's second retaliatory action option is to restrict access to the single market for American companies. Is the 93 billion euro retaliation proposal a negotiating threat or a credible policy option?
It's both. It is a threat and it is credible. It is what's considered the bazooka. It's using the European Union's unilateral, basically, it's what the EU would use to counter President Trump. It's what President Trump uses to counter the European Union. So it's tax, it's sanctions, it is tariffs, it's visa restrictions. I mean, it's everything. But President Trump, has history on his side. And I'll use an example that goes back to 2019 during the first Trump administration. Trump administration had allowed, I'll try not to get too much in the weeds, but had allowed lawsuits to move forward in U.S. federal courts against companies that were using assets in Cuba, where Cuban government had expropriated the assets. They took the assets without compensation. For 60 plus years, U.S. companies have been owed about $1.8 billion. Now it's about $9 billion for property that was taken. Now, many of those companies were European Union based. And the European Union came out very strongly and said, we will not allow this. We will hire lawyers to sit next to the European Union companies in federal court to defend themselves. We will do something. But we're now 7 years later. The European Union they had actually a request for proposal. They never went through with retaining the lawyers for the companies. They never went through with any threats in terms of the lawsuits against the companies, and some have been settled. So if you're President Trump, you're looking at the 27 members of the European Union collectively. You know it's not 27-0. You know there are countries within the European Union that are not going to support any unilateral measure against the United States, particularly Slovakia and Hungary, along with some others. So President Trump is probably feeling pretty good that threats from the EU, threats from NATO, of which the U.S. is a member, really don't deter him. They may alter the result, but as far as deterring him, no, they're not going to deter him.
Well, I will agree absolutely that there is a visible division in between of the European Union states who are not able to form one single position in regards to the future outcomes of this dispute. And one more question, Ms. Vassoler, if I may. If we take the most extreme hypothetical scenario, United States attempt to annex Greenland, multiple security and legal frameworks would immediately be triggered from the United Nations Charter to European Union legislation and NATO obligations. I mean, from the official perspectives. Could you outline which systems will be activated and how they will interact?
I believe that my colleague that is in the panel today, it's quite right in saying that it's going to be, if the final decision of President Trump is indeed to go and invade, conquer Greenland, it's going to be very difficult that there is going to be a unanimous response for international organizations, even the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, to have a unanimous response, or it's difficult to think about coordinated threat imposed or actual done against the United States. At this point, it's sad to say, but the status, the situation of international law organizations such as the United States is very weak. And the president, about a week ago, 10 days ago, stated in his already famous interview to the New York Times that there are no limits for him, that international law is not a limitation at all, that all his decisions are going to be based on his own morality. So I don't see how international organizations could impose any limits to President Trump. Again, his decision, if it is to invade Greenland, yes, can cause many disruptions, including to NATO, including to the European Union. But these disruptions are not going to prevent him to act.
Very interesting, distinguished expert. Thank you so much for joining Inside Politics today.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, Greenland has become one of the clearest examples of the new geopolitics of the Arctic, where territory is small but consequences are large. This dispute is no longer only about tariffs or diplomacy. It's a test of alliances, leverage, and priorities at a time when the Arctic is moving from frozen frontier to competitive space. How this confrontation ends will definitely signal whether Washington and Brussels settle differences through negotiation, or whether a new pattern of strategic friction will define the post-2025 order. You watched Inside Politics. Thank you for being with A News, and see you next time.